You're at the gate for a flight to San Francisco. Boarding pass in hand, Group 4. The upgrade to business class flashes on the app before you close it. $340. Nothing to you now, everything to the version of you that used to fly this route for job interviews. You buy a $6 bag of pretzels instead and call it even. You take your seat, 22C, elbow to elbow, and open your phone out of habit. 10 digits load on the screen. You put the phone face down on your knee before the guy next to you glances over. Somewhere today, a filing with your name on it goes out, public record, sitting in a database nobody in row 22 has ever searched. The filing nobody reads. You land at SFO and take the regular line for rideshares, not the black car service the airport signs point toward. The lift costs $34. You could charter something for 400 times that and never feel it. You don't. The office is on the 11th floor of a glass building on Market Street, and your general counsel is waiting in the small conference room, not the big one with the view. Her name is Grace Delaney. She's been with the company since Series A, before any of this was real, back when payroll ran 2 days late more than once. She has a folder open on the table and a case of Fiji water nobody's touched. Your 10B5-1 plan executed at open, she says. The block sold at market. You're going to want to sit with this part. You already know the number. You've been checking it since the gate in Austin. What you didn't know, what she says next, plain, like she's reading you a weather report, is that within 2 business days, a Form 4 goes to the SEC public, free to search. Anyone with an internet connection and 30 seconds can pull up your name next to the exact number of shares, the exact price, the exact date. You ask if there's a way around it. No, she says. Insiders don't get a version of this that's private. That's kind of the point of the rule. You sit with that, not the number, the visibility of the number. You've spent 6 years building something in rooms nobody was watching, and now the SEC has decided, correctly, that people are entitled to watch you sell it. The wealth was never really the surprising part. You always knew, in the abstract, that the stock would eventually be worth something if the company didn't fail. What you didn't plan for was that becoming rich would also mean becoming documented. A line item in a database, time-stamped, permanent, sitting one search query away from anyone who thought to look. Grace closes the folder like it's nothing, because to her, at this point, it is. She's filed 100 of these for other executives. To you, it's the first time you understand something you'll spend the rest of this year relearning. Nobody has to break into your life to find out what you're worth. They just have to know where to look, and almost nobody does. That's not a loophole. That's not luck. It's a fact about human attention, and it's the only reason any of what comes next is possible. You take the lift back to the airport that evening. Same driver rate, same $34, same seat you'd take if you had nothing at all. You think about the filing going live somewhere in a government system while you're in the air, your name sitting quietly in a document built for total strangers to read. You don't think about who might actually read it. Not yet. That comes later. When you realize the filing isn't the only thing measuring you, and that what you do next won't just be recorded, it'll be interpreted. The founder who bought the Ferrari. You're at a coffee shop 2 blocks from your office, laptop open, trying to get ahead on an email before your first meeting. Your head of investor relations, Renee Okafor, slides into the seat across from you without asking. She's holding her phone out before she even says good morning. You need to see this, she says. It's a screenshot from a finance account with about 200,000 followers. On the left, a photo of a founder named Colton Ruiz, CEO of a payments company that IPO'd around the same time you did, standing outside a dealership next to a new Porsche 911. The paint's some matte gray that costs extra. On the right, his Form 4, filed the same week, showing an 8-figure stock sale. The caption underneath just says, he doesn't believe in his own stock either. You watch the reply count climb while you're sitting there. By the time you finish your coffee, his company's shares are down almost 6%, and nobody's written a word about the business itself. Nothing changed operationally. No earnings miss, no lawsuit, no product failure. Just a car, next to a sale, next to a headline someone else wrote. Renee doesn't have to explain it to you. You already understand it, the way you understand a smell before you understand what's cooking. When your name shows up on a filing, and now you know it always will, anyone watching gets to ask a question you never agreed to answer. Does the person who built this thing still believe in it? A car in a driveway isn't proof of anything, not really. But markets don't trade on proof. They trade on signal, and a founder spending big money right after selling stock reads as one of the loudest signals there is. You think about your own 10B5-1 plan, still running quietly in the background, still selling small pieces on a schedule you set months ago. You think about the fact that every one of those trades already gets filed. Everyone already gets a Form 4. You can't stop being watched. That part was decided the day your company went public. What you can control is what people find when they go looking, whether the story next to your name is a disciplined, pre-scheduled plan or a headline like Colton's. He's going to spend the next 2 earnings calls answering for a car, Renee says, standing to go. Just be aware of that. That's all I'm saying. You nod like you already knew, because in a way you did. You just hadn't seen it laid out with someone else's name on it. It's one thing to understand a rule in the abstract. It's another to watch it cost a person 6% of his company's value in an afternoon over nothing he actually did wrong. Just something he was seen doing. You close your laptop a few minutes later and start walking back to the office. You pass a boutique window on the way, the kind of place you've walked by 100 times without really looking. This time, something in the glass catches your eye and won't quite let go. The Nautilus in the window. The boutique is called S. Wolf & Co., tucked between a wine bar and a shoe store you've never gone into either. The window catches the afternoon light in a way that makes everything inside look underwater. And there it is, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, steel case, that blue dial with the faint horizontal ribbing, sitting on a black velvet stand like it's the only thing in the store worth guarding. You stop walking. You don't decide to. Your feet just stop. A woman steps out from behind the counter before you've even touched the door, like she's been trained to read hesitation from across the room. Her name tag says, Danielle. She doesn't ask if you want to come in. She just says, that one's $35,000 as configured. We have 3 left this year. You almost laugh, not at her, at the number, at how small it sounds compared to the one sitting in your brokerage account. $35,000 is nothing to you now. You could buy it in cash and never think about it again, the way you don't think about a tank of gas. You don't go in. It's not the money. You keep circling back to that. It was never the money. It's the math your brain runs without asking permission. The same math that's been running since the coffee shop, since Colton Ruiz and his Porsche and the 6% his company lost in an afternoon. $35,000, left alone in an index fund tracking the S&P 500, has historically doubled something like every 7 to 10 years. You're 34. If you let that number sit for 30 years instead of putting it on your wrist, it doesn't stay 35,000. It becomes something closer to $500,000, maybe more, depending on which decade you get. The watch tells time. The other version of that money buys you time. Actual years, actual choices, later, when you might need them more than you need them today. Danielle's still watching you through the glass, patient in the specific way people are patient with money they can smell on someone. You give her a small nod, the kind that means not today, and she nods back like she's seen this exact hesitation on this exact sidewalk before. Maybe she has. Maybe half the people who stop at that window walk away for reasons that have nothing to do with what they can afford. You start walking again, and it's not relief exactly what you feel. It's closer to the feeling of holding a door shut against wind. Nobody's going to clap for it. Nobody's going to know you did it, but you can feel the effort in your arms anyway. Nobody at S. Wolf & Company will ever mention you today. Just a version of you that stayed quiet for one more block. Your phone buzzes in your pocket. It's your CFO's name on the screen, and under it, a text. Call me when you get a sec. Need to talk through the plan for the next few months. You put your phone away and pick up your pace toward the office. Borrowing against a number. Your CFO wants to talk somewhere that isn't the office, so you end up on a bench outside a food truck lot on Cesar Chavez, 2 paper trays of brisket tacos going cold between you. His name is Wyatt Bellamy, And he's been running your finance team since before you had a finance team. Back when it was just him and a spreadsheet. You're going to need real cash at some point, he says. A house, probably. Maybe more than one, eventually. And I know what you're thinking. Sell some stock. It's right there. You are thinking that. It's the obvious move. Every time you sell, he says, it's a Form 4. Every time. You saw what happened to Colton Ruiz over a car. Now imagine that same headline, except it's your name and it's a house. He slides his phone across the table instead of raising his voice. On the screen is a term sheet from your prime brokerage, a securities-based line of credit. The idea is simple enough that it almost feels like a trick. You pledge a portion of your stock as collateral, and the bank lends you cash against it. Right now, rates on something like this typically run several points over the benchmark rate, somewhere in the mid to high single digits, depending on how much you're borrowing and how it's collateralized. You don't sell a single share. Nothing gets triggered. No Form 4, no signal, no 6% drop in anything, because nothing about your ownership actually changed. You're still a billionaire on paper, Wyatt says. You just also have a checking account that can write a real check now. You ask him the obvious question, isn't this just debt with extra steps? He shrugs, doesn't dress it up. It is debt. If your stock drops far enough, you could get a call demanding more collateral or a partial repayment, same as anyone with a margin loan, just with more zeros. But debt against an appreciating asset, paid down slowly, quietly, with interest, that's just a cost of doing business. That's not the same animal as a public, dated, headline-ready sale of stock in the company you run. You think about the Nautilus in the window on South Congress, how good it felt to walk past it. This is the same instinct, scaled up to a house instead of a watch. The discipline of not touching the principal, of finding another way to get what you need without ringing a bell that says founder is cashing out. There's a cost either way, Wyatt says, folding his taco wrapper into a small square. This one's just quieter. You sign the term sheet 2 days later, in an office that smells like fresh carpet next to a woman who says she just needs your signature in 4 places. You don't think about where the check gets mailed until you're already walking out. You think about it that night instead, lying in bed, running through where your mail actually goes. And who might be the one to pick it up first? The envelope on the counter. You get home a little after 7, and Bo Sutton is already at the kitchen counter with his laptop open, same as most nights since college. He's the one roommate who never left when the lease was up 2 renewals ago, and neither of you ever brought it up again. Behind him, on the counter, sits a stack of mail he must have grabbed from the box downstairs. You clock it before you even set your keys down. A thick envelope, cream-colored, heavier stock than anything else in the pile. The return address says Silvergate Private Wealth Partners. Bo's got it in his hand, turning it over, reading the front like he's trying to place it. This one's not a catalog, he says, half laughing. Feels like a wedding invitation? You getting married and not telling me? You reach for it a beat too fast. He notices. You can tell by the way his eyebrows move, just slightly, before he hands it over without another word. Your heart is doing something you don't love. Not because Bo would do anything with the information. He wouldn't. He's not the danger. The danger is what's actually inside that envelope, a quarterly statement, and buried 3 pages into it. A line you already know is there. Days spent in California this year, logged by your assistant for expense reporting, sitting at 11 weeks and counting between board meetings, investor dinners, and the trip for Colton's fundraiser you almost skipped. California doesn't let residency go quietly. If the state decides you're spending enough time there to count as a part-year resident, it doesn't matter that your lease, your car registration, and your voter registration all say Austin. It can still tax you on income earned or sourced while you were physically present. And unlike Texas, which has no state income tax at all, California's top rate runs into double digits. 11 weeks isn't over any hard legal line by itself, but it's the kind of number an aggressive residency audit builds a case around, and audits like that don't start with a knock on your door. They start with a data point somebody else noticed. Bo's already back on his laptop, half watching something with headphones half in, the moment already forgotten on his end. You stand there another few seconds, envelope in hand, feeling the specific kind of relief that comes from nothing happening. Nobody asked a real question. Nobody needs an answer. But you felt it, the half second where the whole structure you've built, quietly, over months, came down to whether your roommate decided to open your mail before you got home. It didn't take a reporter. It didn't take a forensic accountant. It almost took a guy who still owes you $40 for last month's electric bill. You put the statement in your bag instead of leaving it on the counter, and you make a mental note to call your tax attorney about the California days before the next filing deadline creeps up on you the way this one almost did. You sit down across from Bo, open your own laptop, and try to look like someone who didn't just have a close call in his own kitchen. The gift with no name on it. You're in a small conference room at a wealth advisory office off 6th Street, the kind with one window and a table too big for the number of chairs around it. Your advisor, a woman named Priscilla Haynes, has a document open on the screen between you, and it's not about California days or SBLOC rates. It's about what to do with money you've already decided you're never going to spend. You mentioned wanting to give something back, she says. This year, the federal gift and estate exemption sits at $15 million per person. That's the ceiling on what you can move without the IRS taking a cut. Most people never get near it. You're going to blow past it eventually, which means the timing of what you give and how you give it actually matters. You tell her you don't want your name on anything. No building, no plaque, no gala where someone reads your name off a card before a slideshow of a hospital wing. She doesn't blink at that. She just nods and pulls up a different structure, a donor-advised fund. You put money in now, you get the deduction now, and the giving itself, who receives what and when, can happen quietly, over years, under the fund's name instead of yours. Anonymous is a checkbox, she says, not a workaround. It's built for exactly this. You think about Bo's hand on that envelope, the half second before he gave it back. You think about Colton Ruiz and the Porsche and the 6% his company lost over a photograph. Every structure you've built since the airport in Section 1 has been about the same thing. Really, keeping your name out of a story other people get to write about you. This is the first one that isn't about protecting yourself. This is the first one where staying invisible does something for someone other than you. You sign where Priscilla points. The number that moves out of your account is bigger than anything you've spent all year. Bigger than the Nautilus, bigger than the down payment Wyatt's SBLOC is sitting there ready to cover. It funds scholarships at a community college in the Rio Grande Valley, a food bank distribution center in East Austin, a maternal health clinic that's been operating out of a strip mall for a decade. None of them will ever get your name. You made sure of that before you signed anything. Priscilla walks you out, already talking about next quarter, already moving on to the next thing on her list. You stand on the sidewalk for a second before calling a car. You think about how strange it is, the one true good thing you did all year, and not one person you love will ever hear about it from you. Not Bo, not your parents, nobody in that line at the HEB, nobody at the gate for the flight to San Francisco, nobody who still thinks you're just getting by like the rest of them. You get in the car and head home, carrying something you can't put down and can't hand to anyone else either. The only filing that was ever really yours. You still check your account balance the same number of times a day you always did. That part never changed. What changed is what you're checking for. Not whether the number is enough, but whether you protected it right, one quiet decision at a time, from a taco truck bench to a conference room off 6th Street. Nobody claps for the version of wealth that stays this quiet. There's no headline for the house you didn't buy, the watch you walked past, the name you kept off a building. You did it anyway. Bo still doesn't know. He might never know. You'll pass the HEB on Ben White again next week. Same line, same $61 total, same held breath before the card taps through. Somewhere, a form with your name on it just filed again. You wonder if this is the year someone finally opens it.